So in my last video, I showed how to make some various explosion effects. And this week I'm just going to do kind of that simple explosion from a single point. And I tried various ways of doing this. If you Google Unity explosion flipbook, which is what I thought at first. I wanted a variation of different images for my actual exploding image, and I thought flipbook would do it. And you can do explosions through that way, and there are actually a default flipbook explosion. And really what a flipbook is a series of images. So here I was playing around with Microsoft's Paint, their co-creator, to create a flipbook of flame images. So you could take this and you can see it's 4 images and it's split into 4 evenly sized grid elements. And in this case, this would be a 2x2 flipbook. And you can use the flipbook animator output to really cycle through these 4 images from a single, really it's a single element that rotates through those images. And you can use that in combination with other visual effects, but mostly someone who would be using an explosion flipbook, maybe it has 16 images and it really just rotates through those images. And what you are left with is an explosion that looks exactly the same every single time, because you're not really generating the effect. You're simply playing a preset set of images over and over and over again, which, you know, would look okay, but then every single explosion in your game would look exactly the same, which isn't very interesting. So you really can't use flipbooks for kind of what I was thinking of. There is a way of randomly selecting from a set of images, which doesn't really help the effect, so I'm not going to go over that. If someone's interested, you can post on the comments and I can show how to do that through some random number generators and some conditional, mainly a switch statement that goes and selects the image you want to feed into your shader. Or you can use this in a shader and randomly select the tiling and offset to select one of the images. But that really didn't work. And it kind of highlights you have to try some things and investigate some things. And I learned about flipbooks and how they work and determined that wasn't what I wanted for my effect. So what I do want for my effect is to produce a random shaped explosion that kind of goes off into different directions, but in a random way, meaning every single explosion is going to look different and yet still look similar. And so what I did is I started with a single spawn system, and in this case it's going to just do a single burst. And I created some variables to control that. This burst amount will say how many particles do I want to burst. And I also have this speed. I have a speed for the vertical, meaning how fast do they go up and how fast do they go out in the X and Z directions. So you can see what I did is I connected the up speed. It's going to go anywhere from 0 to whatever up speed you select. And the left and right in the X and Z directions are going to go between a negative. So if this was 1, they go between -1 and 1. So negative meaning it's going to go out maybe left, depending on how you're facing, and positive would be in the right direction. And maybe in the Z direction, it's forward and back. So that gives you kind of the scope of your shape. And I chose up speed to be different because maybe you don't want it round. A lot of times you may want it to shoot up faster than then going out depending on the effect that you're looking for. And then the lifetime of my burst. So let's kind of see what this burst is going to look like. And it's pretty simple. You can see that I have it set to 5. Here's this burst amount that I have shown. The lifetimes are all 1. The up speed's 1. The left and right speed's 1. So it's going to be pretty uniform. But you can see they go out in a different shape every single time it bursts. And this is going to define the shape of our kind of explosion, that kind of cloud of fire that's going to shoot out from our single point. So now that you kind of understand that, we're not really going to use these particles at all. I just wanted to show that so you can visualize how that's controlling the shape of our explosion. So now what I do is I don't need this update particle. I'm going to leave it on and I'm going to get rid of it in a little bit. But what I'm doing is I'm going to trigger the formation or the creation of my actual fireballs launching. And you can see as soon as I uncheck that what it kind of looks like when I play it. And so what's happening is I am triggering the creation of my explosion elements, and in this case it's going to be triggered over time. And you can set a physical rate. So I can do 10, it's going to be over seconds. I'm assuming it's over seconds. I didn't look in the manual, but if I had 10, a rate of 10, it would do 10 per second. So as this particle moves, it's going to be triggering or creating more particles as it moves. And it's going to, if it traveled, say if its lifetime was 1 second, which in this case it is, and I this to 10, it would spawn 10 of the other particles that I'm triggering. In this case, what I wanted to do, what I found is that if I did an even amount over time, it ended up having a couple leftover explosions at the end that were kind of singularly hanging out in space, and that didn't look good. And so what I did is what I wanted is when they're all tight together, I want to do fewer particles, and as it extends out, I want to do more particles. And so you can see there is an input to the rate. And what I did is I created this sample curve. Let's zoom out. It's way up here. And it's going to go between 3. So at lifetime 0, it's going to be 3. And at lifetime 1, at the end, it's going to be 10. So it's going to increase the rate as it goes out. So the further it travels away from that initial point, the faster it's going to spawn. And I found that that made for a better, more even looking explosion. And it makes sense because when it's tight together, you don't need as many because they're all overlapping. Yet as it expands out, you want to launch more over time. So this is what it's going to spawn. It looks very similar to, in fact, I copy and pasted the the explosion from my earlier video. Essentially what it's going to do is I have this other lifetime for how long the little exploding clouds last. I have a random angle so they all rotate between -90 and +90. I have a fixed velocity. I could have also exposed this velocity, -0.2 and 0.2. So this is when the particle actually is created, it will travel out in a random direction. Again, maybe up a little bit and out, up more and out by that -0.2 and 2. There is no update. Again, I'm using that billowing fire, the same one that I used for the mushroom cloud that I went over in that video. If you want more details on exactly how that shader worked, you can look at that mushroom cloud video on my channel. And the texture is going to be just this same fireball. It's the one that actually looks the best. I played around with the other two that I captured, and this one really, because I think it has that bright and the dark in it, it actually looks pretty good. And actually, I did modify my shader. Let's see, where did you go? All right, so here's the shader. I moved things around, had to figure out where my shader graph image went. But what I'm doing here, so initially I was feeding this image, this sample texture, directly into my alpha. And what that does is you'll notice that, of course, the alpha clip, I want to ignore all this black around it. But what happens is these dark areas of the fire end up being transparent, meaning they really don't show up. You don't get the black because the darker it is, the blacker it is, the more transparent it is. So it's just going to show through the background. So you don't get really the dark part of the fire cloud, which is really important to get a good explosion. So what I did is I just multiplied it by a big number. And you'll see that, you know, a lot of the dark goes away. And these numbers are going to be really big. And I don't want them super bright, so I multiply them by a big number. I could have, if I wanted this solid, you know, white, I could have multiplied it by 100. And then I just clamp it between 0 and 1, which means that if it's greater than 1, it's going to be 1. I don't want the color to be greater than 1, and I don't want it to be less than 0. So I clamp it. And then I, of course, multiply it by my fading noise pattern, which is the same as before, and then I feed it into the alpha. So really what this does is it makes the fire cloud a bit more solid on screen, because I didn't like the look of it when it was more transparent. So I made that change to that shader. All right, so let's go back to this. That's the shader I'm using, going from the yellow to orange the same way. That dark gray I actually could get rid of because I'm not using that. And then, of course, it's the same as I was doing before. 2 curves in for the sample amount, really going from 0 to 1. So that's dissolving it away. And then my color fade, how fast do I go from yellow to red, is just another curve. So again, that's the same kind of as that mushroom cloud. Really, the key is that this particle moving is triggering the creation of my explosion, which again gives me a different looking and shape explosion every single time. And then I added this third one just for kind of the streaks coming out. Again, that's just a really basic, you know, it's just a burst of particles coming out. Actually, I turned it off. If I turn it on, you can see this little burst of particles coming out. And they really just have a particle strip. Again, a particle strip, yellow and orange. I actually grabbed my same billowing smoke, which is similar to that billowing fire. It's just going to be another taking an image. And I used the fireball. Probably could have used a simple particle going from yellow to orange. The fireball actually gives a nice yellow-orange streak. And if we make this a little bit smaller, let's go here, get rid of our, whoops. This is the one. Get rid of our update particle because we really don't need it. I can just set the size to 0. It's one way of hiding it. And now when we play, we can see, let's get rid of that guy. We can see I get that kind of multiple explosion but you can see it's a different looking explosion every single time. And what I can do is I can play around with these values. So I now have these values, the burst amount, how many items do I want? How long do I want those items to last? So if I do 0.5, we're going to get somewhat of a different look. They won't travel out as long, so the explosion is a bit tighter. I can also change the burst amount. So say if I did 20, it's going to look a bit different. There's just more of them. It actually doesn't look as good. When you get too many, it just doesn't, it ends up, you can't see the individual little explosion clouds. The last thing I wanted to cover is, and I know I don't go through step-by-step instructions. Something like this would take way longer, and I just find watching people, I tend to fast forward through videos because I just want to see what the end result is that they did. But you'll notice that the great thing about VFX Graph is I can put as many of these graph items and spawn as many items as I want. And with the normal particle system, I'd have to make a game object. I'd have to attach multiple particle systems. And it's kind of nice being able to do multiple ones together. An easy way of creating a new system is if you just say create node system. You can create an empty one. They have some kind of interesting default ones. But if I just do an empty particle system, what I do is I get this basic spawn that I can add my spawn event onto, right? I can do spawn single burst. I got my output quad, just some defaults, update particle initialize. So now I got an empty one that I can work with, which is what I typically do. They have ones that default to putting up a particle strip that you can then modify. But it's very handy to stack them up on top of each other to get a bit more complicated effect. So that's it for this video. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do next. I have some ideas that I'm going to play around with, but I think I'm kind of done with my explosion effects. May do some things with the meshes, or I've always wanted to do an interesting lightning effect. I know there's videos out there on lightning, but they're always a single bolt of lightning or a lightning arc, which look cool, and I've done those, and they do look cool. But what about forked lightning? I don't know if I'm thinking that this whole spawn over a particle with some random numbers to feed into the spawn amount. You can imagine if it's traveling and the spawn amount is 0, it's not going to spawn a particle at all. But if the spawn event was higher, it would spawn a particle. And controlling the direction, maybe as a particle is traveling down, it could be spawning others in order to get the forks to the lightning. That's what I'm thinking. Not sure if it's going to work or what it would look like, but I think I'm going to play around with that next because I've always wanted to do more realistic lightning than the ones I've seen in videos so far. So hope this helped. Again, get a nice looking explosion that's different every single time, which I think really adds to it instead of just playing a preset set of images. So if you like this, subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for my next video. Thanks for watching.